I was sitting in my home office on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in Phoenix, Arizona, when I heard the unmistakable sound of someone knocking on my door with the kind of aggressive rhythm that could only mean trouble. The kind of knock that said whoever was on the other side believed they had authority and wanted me to know it. I stood up from my desk, where I'd been reviewing engineering schematics for the solar panel project I was consulting on, and walked to the front door. Through the peephole, I could see a woman in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, with that particular haircut that seemed to be standard issue for a certain type of person. You know the one. Blonde highlights, shorter in the back, the works. Opening the door, I was immediately hit with a blast of 100-degree heat and an even hotter glare from the woman standing on my porch. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Are you Adam Keller?" She demanded, clutching a leather-bound folder to her chest like it was some kind of sacred text. "That's me. I'm Patricia Morrison, president of the Saguaro Heights Homeowners Association. We need to discuss a serious violation that's been brought to our attention." I felt my eyebrows rise. I'd lived in this neighborhood for 3 years and had managed to avoid any HOA drama. I kept my lawn maintained, my house painted in approved colors, and generally kept to myself. "What violation?" Patricia's lips pursed so tightly they practically disappeared. "May I come in?" "This is a delicate matter." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let her in. The blast of air conditioning seemed to do nothing to cool her demeanor as she marched into my living room, her sensible heels clicking on the tile floor. "I'll get right to the point, Mr. Keller. We've received complaints about your ceiling fans." I blinked. "My ceiling fans, specifically, the direction in which they rotate." She opened her folder and pulled out what appeared to be a printed email. "Mrs. Henderson from across the street was visiting your neighbor, Carol, last week. She happened to glance through your front window and noticed that your ceiling fan in the living room was rotating counterclockwise." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. None came. "I'm sorry," I said slowly, "but are you telling me that the HOA is concerned about which direction my ceiling fans rotate inside my own home?" "The HOA bylaws are very clear about maintaining proper standards throughout the community," Patricia said, her voice taking on the tone of someone reciting scripture. "Section 14, subsection C states that all fixtures, including ceiling fans, must be operated in accordance with manufacturer specifications and seasonal recommendations." "And you think I'm not doing that?" Patricia's expression suggested she'd caught me red-handed committing a felony. "Mr. Keller, it is well established that ceiling fans should rotate clockwise during winter months and counterclockwise during summer months. You are operating your fan counterclockwise, which means you are in the correct setting. However, based on the complaint filed, there are concerns that this may not be consistent throughout your home, and we need to verify compliance." I couldn't help the laugh that escaped. "You want to inspect my home to check which way my ceiling fans are spinning? This is not a laughing matter. The integrity of our community standards depends on every resident following the rules." "Patricia," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "I'm a mechanical engineer. I understand thermodynamics and fluid dynamics. My fans are set exactly the way they should be. In summer, counterclockwise creates a downdraft that provides a wind-chill effect. In winter, clockwise pushes warm air that rises back down from the ceiling. I literally study this stuff for a living. The HOA board has determined that an inspection is necessary." "No." The single word seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Her face flushed red. "Excuse me. No, you're not coming into my home to inspect my ceiling fans. That's absurd, and frankly, I'm pretty sure it's not within the HOA's authority anyway." Patricia's hand trembled slightly as she pulled another document from her folder. According to Section 3, subsection of the bylaws you signed when you purchased this property, the HOA reserves the right to conduct interior inspections when violations are reported or suspected. For things like water damage that might affect other units or safety hazards, sure. Not for ceiling fan directions. That's not what that clause is for, and you know it. The board will be meeting Thursday evening at 7 p.m. at the community center. You are hereby formally notified to attend and address this violation. Failure to appear will result in fines starting at $200 per day until compliance is achieved. She thrust a formal-looking letter into my hand and marched toward the door. Before leaving, she turned back. I suggest you take this seriously, Mr. Keller. The HOA has legal authority to place liens on properties for unpaid fines. Good day. The door closed behind her, and I stood there holding the letter, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of elaborate prank. I pulled out my phone and called my neighbor, Marcus, who'd lived in the neighborhood for 7 years. "Hey, Adam, what's up?" he answered. "Did you know that Patricia Morrison has apparently lost her mind?" Marcus groaned. "What did she do now?" "She just told me I have to appear before the HOA board because someone complained about the direction my ceiling fans are rotating." There was a long pause. "You're kidding." I wish I was. "She literally stood in my living room and told me they want to inspect my home to verify that all my fans are rotating in the correct seasonal direction." That sounds exactly like Patricia. She tried to find me last year because my garage door was open for more than 2 hours on a Saturday. Said it was unsightly and violated community standards. I told her I was literally unloading a truck full of furniture from my mother's estate. She didn't care. Eventually, I had to get a lawyer involved to make her back off. Seriously. Dude, she's been on a power trip ever since she got elected HOA president 2 years ago. She's fined people for having their trash cans visible from the street 15 minutes before collection time, for parking their own cars in their own driveways overnight because they weren't luxury vehicles that added to the neighborhood aesthetic, and for having mailboxes that were the wrong shade of black. I'm not making this up. I rubbed my temples. This is insane. Can she actually fine me for this? She can try. Whether it would hold up is another question. Most people just pay the fines because it's easier than fighting. But you're an engineer, right? You've got the knowledge to back up your position. Yeah, but this shouldn't even be a fight I need to have. Welcome to HOA life, my friend. Listen, if you do go to that meeting, bring documentation. Patricia backs down when you come with facts and evidence. She's a bully, but she's a coward when someone actually stands up to her. After hanging up with Marcus, I spent the rest of the evening researching HOA law in Arizona, ceiling fan operation, and the specific bylaws of Saguaro Heights. The more I read, the angrier I became. The clause Patricia cited about interior inspections was clearly intended for legitimate structural or safety concerns, not for checking appliance operations. And nowhere in the bylaws was there any specific mention of ceiling fans or their direction of rotation. Thursday evening arrived, and I walked into the community center with a leather briefcase containing printed documentation, my laptop, and a determination to not let this absurdity stand. The community center was a modest building with a large meeting room that contained several rows of folding chairs facing a long table where 5 board members sat. Patricia was in the center, flanked by 2 men and 2 women I vaguely recognized from neighborhood events. About 15 other residents were scattered in the chairs, some looking bored, others clearly there for the entertainment value. I recognized a few faces, including Marcus, who gave me an encouraging nod. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a gavel that seemed unnecessarily aggressive. "We have several items on tonight's agenda," she announced, reading from a paper. "First, the community newsletter budget. Second, the landscaping contract renewal. Third, violation hearing for Adam Keller regarding improper fixture operation." She went through the first two items quickly, barely letting the other board members speak. When my name came up, her expression shifted into something resembling satisfaction. "Mr. Keller, please come forward." I walked to a small podium facing the board, setting my briefcase on it. "You are here tonight to address a violation regarding the operation of ceiling fans within your residence. As president of this HOA, I take our community standards very seriously. We've received a complaint that suggests you may be operating these fixtures improperly. How do you respond?" "I respond by saying this entire proceeding is absurd," I said calmly. "My ceiling fans are operated exactly as they should be, according to both physics and common sense. In summer, they rotate counterclockwise to create a downdraft. In winter, they'll rotate clockwise to circulate warm air. This is standard practice supported by every manufacturer and engineer." One of the male board members, whose nameplate read George Reeves, leaned forward. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm confused. Is the complaint that he's operating them incorrectly, or just that we need to verify?" Patricia shot him an irritated look. "The complaint was that observations suggested possible improper operation. As board president, I deemed an interior inspection necessary." "Which I denied," I interjected. "And which I continue to deny. The HOA does not have authority to inspect my home for this purpose. The bylaw clause cited applies to structural issues, not to how I operate appliances inside my private residence." "The bylaws state," Patricia began. "I've read the bylaws," I interrupted, pulling out a printed copy with highlighted sections. Section 3, subsection A specifically refers to inspections related to structural integrity, water damage, fire hazards, or other conditions that may affect the safety or property values of adjacent units. Ceiling fan rotation direction affects none of these things. Improper operation of any fixture could be considered a safety hazard, Patricia countered. Except there's no improper operation occurring, I'm happy to explain the physics. I pulled out my laptop and opened a presentation I'd prepared. "May I?" George nodded. "I'd actually like to hear this." I connected my laptop to the projector system and brought up a diagram showing ceiling fan operation. Ceiling fans don't actually cool the air. They create air movement that causes evaporative cooling on skin, which makes people feel cooler. In summer, you want the fan rotating counterclockwise when viewed from below. This creates a downdraft, pushing air directly onto occupants. The wind chill effect makes people feel up to 4 degrees cooler, allowing you to raise your thermostat setting and save energy. I clicked to the next slide. In winter, you reverse the direction to clockwise, which creates an updraft. This pulls cool air up and pushes warm air that has risen to the ceiling back down along the walls. Since the fan is set on low speed in winter, you don't feel a direct breeze, but you get better heat distribution. This is basic thermodynamics and fluid dynamics, I continued. It's supported by the Department of Energy, every ceiling fan manufacturer, and any HVAC professional. My fans are set exactly correctly for summer operation right now. Another board member, a woman named Sandra Lewis, nodded. That makes sense. My husband always handles our fans, but I think he does the same thing. Patricia's jaw clenched. The complaint was filed in good faith by a concerned community member. We have an obligation to investigate all complaints. The complaint, I said, was from someone who apparently looked through my window into my private home and decided to report how my ceiling fan was spinning. That's not community concern. That's invasion of privacy. Mrs. Henderson happened to notice. Mrs. Henderson was spying through my window. Let's call it what it is. A few chuckles rippled through the audience. Patricia's face flushed. Mr. Keller, your attitude is not helping your case. What case? There is no case. I haven't violated anything. You've manufactured a problem where none exists. George cleared his throat. Mrs. Morrison, I have to agree with Mr. Keller. I don't see a violation here. He's explained the proper operation of ceiling fans, which matches everything I've ever heard. I don't think we have grounds to pursue this further. I second that, Sandra added. Patricia looked like she'd been slapped. We haven't completed the investigation. There's nothing to investigate, George said firmly. Mr. Keller has demonstrated knowledge and proper use of his fixtures. Unless you have evidence of actual improper operation or a safety hazard, we should dismiss this. I vote to dismiss, Sandra said. I also vote to dismiss, said another board member, a quiet man named Robert Chen. The fifth board member, a woman named Denise Patterson, who had been silent throughout, shifted uncomfortably. I think we should trust Mrs. Morrison's judgment. She's been president for 2 years and has kept our community standards high by harassing residents about ceiling fans. George asked sharply, Denise, this is getting out of hand. Patricia, I respect your dedication, but we need to focus on actual issues, not interior design choices or appliance operations. Patricia stood abruptly. I call for a formal vote. All in favor of requiring Mr. Keller to allow an interior inspection to verify proper fixture operation. Only Denise raised her hand. All opposed, George, Sandra, and Robert raised their hands. The motion is defeated, George said. Mr. Keller, thank you for coming tonight and for the educational presentation. Your ceiling fans are clearly in proper working order. This matter is dismissed. I nodded, gathering my materials. Thank you. As I turned to leave, Patricia's voice rang out. This isn't over. The president has the authority to issue citations independent of board votes for clear violations. George stood up. Patricia, that authority exists for emergency situations like immediate safety hazards, not for personal vendettas. If you issue a citation for this, I'll call for a vote to remove you as president. The room went silent. Patricia's face cycled through several shades of red before she sat down stiffly. I left the community center feeling vindicated but uneasy. Marcus caught up with me in the parking lot. That was amazing, he said. I've never seen anyone stand up to her like that, and George threatening to call for her removal. That was beautiful. I just want to live in my house in peace, I said. Yeah, well, Patricia doesn't do peace. Watch your back. She's going to retaliate somehow. Marcus was right. 3 days later, I came home from work to find a citation taped to my front door. This one claimed I had violated Section 9, subsection D of the bylaws regarding unauthorized modifications to property exterior. The alleged violation was that I had installed an unapproved solar panel system on my roof. I'd installed solar panels 6 months ago, and I'd submitted all the required paperwork to the HOA, which had been approved without issue. I had the approval letter in my files. I called George directly, having gotten his number at the meeting. Adam, I'm so sorry, he said when I explained. Patricia is out of control. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. Can you come tomorrow night? I'll be there. The emergency meeting was tense. I brought my HOA approval letter for the solar panels, along with all the permits and documentation. Patricia tried to claim that the approval had been granted in error, and that she, as president, was correcting a mistake. The approval was granted by the Architectural Review Committee 6 months ago, George said, reading through the file. You were part of that committee, Patricia. You signed off on this. I signed a preliminary approval pending final inspection, Patricia said. There's no mention of a final inspection requirement in this letter, Sandra said, looking at the document. It says approved for installation right here. Procedure requires. The bylaws don't require a final inspection for solar panels, Robert interrupted, pulling up the bylaws on his tablet. You're making this up. The meeting devolved into an argument, with Patricia insisting she had authority to revoke approvals and the other 3 board members disagreeing. Eventually, they voted to uphold the original approval and void the citation, but Patricia wasn't done. Over the next 2 weeks, I received citations for having my trash cans visible from the street, even though it was trash day and they were at the curb. I received a citation for having a package delivered to my porch that sat there for 3 hours before I got home from work, claiming it was visual clutter. I received a citation for parking my personal car in my own driveway overnight. Each citation came with a $200 fine. I contested all of them, and the board voided all of them, but it was eating up hours of my time and creating enormous stress. Finally, George called me. Adam, we're having a special meeting next week. I'm calling for a vote to remove Patricia as president. We have the 3 votes we need. I wanted to give you a heads up. I appreciate that. This has been insane. I know. And I'm sorry we didn't rein her in sooner. We've been hearing complaints from other residents too. She's been targeting anyone who questions her authority. It's time for her to go. The special meeting was packed. Word had spread through the neighborhood, and at least 40 residents showed up. The tension in the room was palpable. George called the meeting to order and immediately moved to the main agenda item. We are here tonight to vote on removing Patricia Morrison as HOA president based on abuse of authority, harassment of residents, and issuing citations without proper basis. Patricia shot to her feet. This is a coup. You 3 have conspired against me because you don't like that I hold people accountable. You've issued 27 citations in the past month alone, Sandra said, holding up a stack of papers. 23 of them have been contested and voided by board vote. You're not holding people accountable. You're harassing them. Every one of those citations was valid. The board voted against them because you're all too weak to enforce our standards. You tried to fine a man for which direction his ceiling fans were spinning inside his home, George said. That's not enforcing standards. That's insanity. The audience murmured agreement. I move that we vote immediately, Robert said. All in favor of removing Patricia Morrison as president, George, Sandra, and Robert raised their hands. All opposed, Patricia and Denise raised their hands. The motion passes. Patricia, effective immediately, you are removed as president. George, as vice president, you are now acting president until we can hold elections. Patricia stood frozen for a moment, her face white with rage. Then she grabbed her papers and stormed toward the door. Before leaving, she turned back. You haven't heard the last of this. I'll sue the HOA and every one of you personally. You've violated my rights and damaged my reputation. I'll own all of your houses when I'm done. She slammed the door behind her. The room erupted in conversation. George banged the gavel. Order, please. We need to finish this meeting properly. They voted George in as interim president, established a date for proper elections, and went through several other pieces of business. When it was over, at least a dozen residents came up to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to Patricia. You started this, Marcus said. If you hadn't challenged her on that ceiling fan nonsense, she'd still be terrorizing everyone. I drove home that night feeling relieved but also wary. Patricia's threat of lawsuits hung in my mind. 2 weeks passed quietly. George was doing a good job as president, focusing on actual community issues like road repairs and updating the playground equipment. Several residents commented that the neighborhood felt different, less oppressive. Then, on a Tuesday morning, I woke up to find that someone had spray-painted bylaw violator across my garage door in red paint. I called the police immediately. A young officer named Dave Martinez came out to take a report. "Any idea who might have done this?" he asked, photographing the damage. "I have a suspicion," I said, explaining the situation with Patricia and the HOA. "Sounds like harassment. Has she made any direct threats?" "She threatened to sue, but nothing violent." "We'll file this as vandalism. If you have security cameras, that would help." "I don't, but I'm getting some installed today." I called a security company that afternoon, and they had cameras installed by evening. The system covered my front door, driveway, garage, and backyard. 3 days later, the cameras caught Patricia walking up my driveway at 2 in the morning. She spray-painted "Rules Matter" on my driveway before leaving. I had her on video, clear as day. I called Officer Martinez back. "I've got her on camera vandalizing my property." He came over, reviewed the footage, and nodded. "That's definitely her. We can move forward with charges." "This is criminal mischief, possibly criminal trespassing as well." "I want to press charges." "I understand. Let me talk to my supervisor and we'll go from there." The next day, 2 officers went to Patricia's house to question her. According to Marcus, who heard about it through the neighborhood grapevine, she denied everything initially, then claimed she was just reminding me about community standards when confronted with the video evidence. She was arrested and charged with criminal mischief and criminal trespassing. The arrest became neighborhood news within hours, but it got worse for Patricia. Once people heard she'd been arrested, other residents started coming forward with their own stories. She'd allegedly keyed someone's car after they painted their house trim a shade of white that was a few degrees off from the approved color. She'd reportedly torn up someone's garden plants because they weren't on the approved landscaping list. She'd supposedly put a dead bird in someone's mailbox after they opposed her at a board meeting. None of these had been reported to police before because people were afraid of retaliation from the HOA. Now, with Patricia removed from power and facing charges, they felt safe speaking up. The police investigation expanded. They found evidence of several of these incidents, including the keyed car, which had security footage Patricia didn't know about. Additional charges were filed: more criminal mischief, harassment, stalking. The case was growing serious. I was contacted by a detective named Sarah Brennan, who was now handling the case. "Mr. Keller, we're building a pattern of behavior here. Your testimony about the ceiling fan incident and subsequent harassment will be important. Would you be willing to testify if this goes to trial?" "Absolutely." "Good. I want you to know we're taking this seriously. HOA board positions don't give anyone the right to commit crimes, and Mrs. Morrison crossed that line multiple times." Patricia's lawyer tried to arrange a plea deal, but the prosecutor's office was pushing for accountability given the pattern of behavior. The case moved forward. During this time, I had to deal with the practical aftermath. My garage door needed to be repainted, which cost $800. My driveway needed professional cleaning, another $300. I filed a civil suit against Patricia for these damages plus emotional distress. The HOA, under George's leadership, also filed a civil suit against Patricia for damaging the community's reputation and costing the association money in legal fees and resident complaints. Marcus told me that Patricia's husband, a quiet man I'd seen a few times at neighborhood events, had filed for divorce. Apparently, he'd been unaware of the extent of her behavior and was horrified when it all came out. The criminal trial took place 4 months later in Maricopa County Superior Court. I testified about the ceiling fan incident, the subsequent harassment, and the vandalism. Other residents testified about their experiences. The security footage was played for the jury. Patricia's defense was essentially that she had been trying to maintain community standards, and that everyone was conspiring against her because they didn't like being held accountable. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a dedicated community servant who had been pushed too far by rule-breaking residents. The prosecution countered with the video evidence, the testimony of multiple victims, and expert testimony about HOA law and the limits of board authority. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Patricia guilty on multiple counts of criminal mischief, 2 counts of criminal trespassing, and 1 count of stalking. She was sentenced to 18 months in jail, with the possibility of early release for good behavior after serving a minimum of 6 months. She was also ordered to pay restitution to all the victims, including me, and was permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. My civil suit was settled out of court. Patricia's homeowner's insurance ended up covering most of my damages after I provided documentation of her harassment. I received the $800 for the garage, the $300 for the driveway, and an additional $2,000 for emotional distress and legal fees. The HOA's suit against her was also settled, with Patricia agreeing to pay back legal fees and issue a formal apology to all residents. George was elected as permanent HOA president in the next regular election, running unopposed. One of his first acts was to revise the bylaws to include clearer limits on board authority and better protections for residents against frivolous citations. He also established a formal appeals process that didn't require residents to appear before the full board for minor issues, and he created a committee to review all citations before they were issued to ensure they had merit. Life in Saguaro Heights settled into something resembling normalcy. The neighborhood felt lighter, friendlier. People were less afraid to make small personalization choices to their properties. The HOA focused on actual community improvements rather than petty enforcement. I kept my security cameras up, though I hoped I'd never need them again for something like this. I also joined the HOA board as treasurer, figuring that if I was involved, I could help prevent future Patricias from gaining power. Marcus became the secretary, and we worked with George to create a more transparent, resident-friendly HOA. We published detailed financial reports quarterly. We held open forums where residents could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. We created a community website where people could easily access bylaws, meeting minutes, and contact information. One evening, about 8 months after the trial, I was sitting on my back patio enjoying the cooler October weather. My ceiling fan on the covered patio was rotating clockwise now, gently pushing warm air down as the desert nights started getting chilly. Marcus came over with 2 beers. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the evening. "You ever think about how all of this started over a ceiling fan?" he asked. "All the time," I said. "It's insane. If Patricia had just left me alone, she'd still be president. She'd still have her reputation, her marriage, her freedom. She couldn't help herself. Some people get a little bit of power and it corrupts them completely. She thought being HOA president made her queen of the neighborhood. The scary thing is how long she got away with it, how many people just paid her bogus fines because it was easier than fighting, a lot. But you fought. And you won, and now the whole neighborhood is better for it." I took a sip of beer. I just wanted my fans to spin in the right direction, Marcus laughed. And they do. Physics supports your method. Physics supports my method, I agreed. We sat there as the sun set behind the mountains, the fan above us rotating steadily clockwise, doing exactly what it was designed to do. In the distance, I could hear kids playing in the neighborhood park, their laughter carrying on the evening air. Someone was grilling, the smell of mesquite smoke drifting over. This was what an HOA should be about, I thought. Creating a community where people felt safe and comfortable in their homes. Not about power trips and petty enforcement and spying through windows to see which way ceiling fans were spinning. My phone buzzed with an email. It was from George, sent to all board members. The subject line read, "Proposal for Community Improvement Fund." I opened it and read his idea about setting aside a portion of HOA dues to help elderly or disabled residents with home maintenance they couldn't afford or physically do themselves. It was thoughtful, practical, and exactly the kind of thing an HOA should be doing. I replied with my support and a few suggestions for implementation. Work email, Marcus asked. HOA business. George wants to create a fund to help elderly residents with maintenance. That's a great idea. This is what it should have been all along. Yeah. We finished our beers as full darkness settled over Phoenix. The city lights began to glow in the distance, and the temperature dropped into the pleasant range. My ceiling fan kept rotating, pushing warm air down in gentle circulation. Inside the house, my other ceiling fans were all set to clockwise for the winter season, exactly as they should be. The fan in my bedroom, the one in the guest room, the one in my office, all rotating in perfect accordance with the laws of thermodynamics and fluid dynamics. And no one was going to fine me for it. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a run through the neighborhood. The streets were quiet in the pre-dawn light, just a few other early risers out walking dogs or jogging. I waved to familiar faces, exchanged good mornings, enjoyed the sense of community that had been missing during Patricia's reign. When I got back home and was cooling down in my driveway, I saw Mrs. Henderson, the woman who had originally complained about my ceiling fan, getting her newspaper from the end of her driveway across the street. On impulse, I walked over. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson." She looked startled, then guilty. "Oh, good morning, Adam. I wanted to thank you," I said. She blinked. "Thank me. If you hadn't reported my ceiling fan to Patricia, none of this would have come to light. She'd still be harassing people, still abusing her authority. Your complaint, as ridiculous as it was, set off a chain of events that made this neighborhood a better place." Mrs. Henderson's face crumpled. "I'm so sorry about that. Patricia asked me to keep an eye on your house. She said you were a troublemaker and that she needed documentation of violations. When I mentioned seeing your fan through the window, I was just making conversation. I didn't think she'd actually make a complaint out of it. I had no idea she'd take it so far. That was interesting. She asked you to spy on me, on several people. She had different neighbors watching different houses. She called it being vigilant about community standards. After everything came out, I realized how wrong it was. I should have said something sooner. Well, it's over now, and the neighborhood is better off. It is. George is doing a wonderful job. I'm glad you're on the board now, too. You and Marcus and the others, you actually care about making this a good place to live." I went back home, showered, and headed to work feeling oddly philosophical about the whole experience. Sometimes the smallest, most absurd conflicts revealed larger truths about people and power and community. At work, I was deep into a project analyzing airflow patterns in a new building design when my desk phone rang. It was George. "Hey, Adam, sorry to bother you at work. Quick question. Do you know anything about pool filtration systems? A bit. Why? The community pool pump is acting up, and the company that installed it wants to charge us $3,000 for repairs. I think they're overcharging. Would you be willing to take a look? Sure. I can stop by this evening. Thanks. This is why we need people with actual expertise on the board. That evening, I met George at the community pool. The pump was indeed having issues, but after an hour of inspection and testing, I determined that it just needed a new filter and some basic maintenance, not a complete overhaul. Total cost, about $300 in parts and a few hours of work. George was thrilled. See, this is what I'm talking about. Patricia would have just paid the $3,000 because she wouldn't know any better, or because the company rep was someone she wanted to impress. Or she would have refused to pay it at all and let the pool sit broken while she argued with them, I added. True. Hey, speaking of Patricia, her sentencing got reduced. She's getting out next month on good behavior. How do you feel about that, honestly? I hope she moves. I heard her house is up for sale. Her ex-husband already moved to Tucson. I think she's going to go somewhere else and start over. Probably for the best. Yeah. Hey, changing subjects, we're having a community barbecue next Saturday. Can you make it? Wouldn't miss it. The community barbecue was the first major neighborhood event under the new board's leadership. We set up in the park area, with grills, tables, and games for kids. About 60 people showed up, which was a great turnout. I manned one of the grills, flipping burgers and hot dogs while chatting with neighbors. The atmosphere was relaxed, friendly, completely different from the tense, watchful feeling that had pervaded the neighborhood under Patricia's rule. A family who'd moved in just a month ago, the Johnsons, came up to the grill. The dad, Tyler, shook my hand. I heard what happened before we moved in. Just wanted to say thanks for making this a place where we feel welcome. Our last HOA was a nightmare. We almost didn't buy here because of horror stories about HOAs, but everyone told us it was different now. We're trying to keep it that way, I said, handing him a burger. His wife, Allison, laughed. Tyler's paranoid. He keeps checking to make sure all our outdoor decorations meet HOA standards. We're reasonable, I assured them. If it's not causing a legitimate problem for neighbors or violating actual safety codes, we're probably not going to care. That's the approach we're taking. Even ceiling fans, Tyler joked, especially ceiling fans. The barbecue went late into the evening, with people lingering to talk and enjoy the perfect October weather. Kids ran around the playground. Teenagers played basketball on the community court. Adults stood in small groups chatting and laughing. This was what community was supposed to be. As I was helping clean up afterwards, Sandra came over. Adam, I wanted to ask you something. We're looking to fill the position of Architectural Review Committee Chair. Would you be interested? What would that involve? Reviewing requests for modifications to property exteriors. Approvals for things like solar panels, paint colors, landscaping changes, that kind of thing. Given your engineering background and your experience with the whole solar panel situation, I think you'd be perfect. Let me think about it. I don't want to overcommit. Of course. No rush. But we could really use someone with technical knowledge and common sense in that role. I drove home that night thinking about how much my life had changed over the past year. When I'd moved to Saguaro Heights 3 years ago, I just wanted a nice, quiet place to live while I focused on my career. I'd never imagined getting involved in HOA politics, standing up to a power-hungry board president, testifying in criminal court, or becoming a board member myself. But here I was, actively involved in shaping my community, working to make it a better place for everyone who lived here. My phone rang as I was pulling into my driveway. It was my sister, Emily, calling from Seattle. "Hey sis, what's up? Just checking in." "How's the famous ceiling fan warrior doing?" I laughed. "You're never going to let me live that down, are you? Are you kidding?" When you told me that story, I laughed for like 20 minutes. Only you would end up in a legal battle over which way your fans spin. It wasn't my choice. I know. But seriously, I'm proud of you. You stood up to a bully and made your neighborhood better. That takes courage. It was just the right thing to do. That's what makes it courageous. Most people wouldn't have fought. They would have just paid the fines or moved. You actually stood your ground. We talked for another half hour, catching up on family news and her work and my work. Before we hung up, she said, "Hey, I'm thinking about visiting for Thanksgiving. Can I crash at your place?" "Of course. I'll put you in the guest room." Warning though, the ceiling fan spins clockwise in winter. "Oh no. Are you sure that's allowed? Physics supports my method." She was still laughing when we ended the call. November rolled into December, and George announced that Patricia's house had sold. She was apparently moving to New Mexico to live near her sister. I felt a strange mix of relief and something like pity. She'd destroyed her own life over something as petty as neighborhood power. The HOA held its annual holiday party in mid-December. It was better attended than any holiday party in the neighborhood's history, according to longtime residents. We decorated the community center, set up a potluck dinner, and even hired a local acoustic guitarist to provide background music. I brought my famous chili, which I'd been perfecting for years. It disappeared within 30 minutes. Marcus came up to me holding an empty bowl. "Dude, this chili is amazing. How have I lived next to you for this long and never had it before?" "You never asked." "I'm asking now." "Recipe?" "Family secret, but I'll make it again for the next potluck." George clinked a glass to get everyone's attention. "If I could have a moment, please. I just want to say thank you to everyone here. This year has been challenging for our community, but we've come through it stronger. We've refocused on what an HOA should be about: serving residents, maintaining property values through smart improvements, and fostering a genuine sense of community." People applauded. I also want to specifically thank Adam Keller, who had the courage to stand up when something was wrong and who has been instrumental in helping us rebuild trust and functionality in our board. Adam, everyone here owes you a debt of gratitude. The applause was louder this time, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment. After George's speech, people kept coming up to thank me, share their own Patricia stories, and express relief that things had changed. It was simultaneously heartwarming and sobering to hear how many people had been negatively affected. One elderly man, Mr. Paulson, pulled me aside. "Son, I want to tell you something. I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years. I've seen 4 different HOA boards. Patricia was by far the worst, but the others weren't much better. Most HOAs start with good intentions, but power corrupts. It happens slowly, bit by bit. First, it's reasonable rules reasonably enforced. Then someone decides they need to be stricter. Then someone else decides they need to interpret rules more broadly. Before you know it, you're living under petty tyranny." "I'll keep that in mind," I said. "See that you do. You and George and the others, you have a chance to do this right. Don't waste it. Don't let the power go to your head. Remember what it felt like to be on the other side of unreasonable authority." "I will, Mr. Paulson. I promise." He patted my shoulder and wandered off to get more food. His words stuck with me. It was a reminder that vigilance was necessary, not just against external threats, but against our own potential to become what we'd fought against. I took the Architectural Review Committee chair position after all. My first major decision was approving a request from a young couple to install a vegetable garden in their front yard. The previous board would have denied it as not matching the neighborhood aesthetic. I approved it with the stipulation that they maintain it neatly. 3 other families asked to do the same thing within a month. We were accidentally starting a neighborhood gardening trend. My second major decision was denying a request from someone who wanted to paint their house purple with green trim. I felt a little hypocritical until Marcus pointed out that there was a difference between reasonable standards and unreasonable enforcement. "We can have rules," he said. "We just need to make sure they make sense and that we apply them fairly. You're not being like Patricia. You're doing your job." The months rolled by. Winter became spring, spring became summer. Life in Saguaro Heights continued peacefully. The HOA focused on real issues: repaving roads, updating landscaping, organizing community events, negotiating better rates on trash collection and pool maintenance. We had disagreements, of course. Sandra and I butted heads over whether to approve a request for a backyard koi pond. George and Marcus had a lengthy debate about the community newsletter budget. Robert thought we should invest in neighborhood security patrols, while I argued it was unnecessary and would create an oppressive atmosphere. But these were normal disagreements, resolved through discussion and democratic voting. No one was issuing citations out of spite. No one was vandalizing property. No one was spying through windows. One afternoon in June, I was working from home when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a young woman in her late 20s holding a clipboard. "Hi, I'm Jennifer Kim from the Arizona HOA Reform Coalition. Do you have a few minutes to talk about HOA accountability legislation?" "Sure," I said, curious. She explained that her organization was working to pass state legislation that would create better oversight of HOAs, establish clearer limits on their authority, and provide easier paths for homeowners to challenge unfair decisions. "We've been following your case," she said. The situation with Patricia Morrison made news in the HOA reform community. It's a perfect example of what happens when board members have too much unchecked authority. "What can I do to help? Would you be willing to testify before the state legislature?" "We're trying to get hearings scheduled for next session. Personal stories like yours are powerful." "Absolutely." I ended up testifying before a committee at the Arizona State Capitol in Phoenix that September. I told the story of the ceiling fan complaint, the harassment, the vandalism, and how the situation had spiraled out of control before the board finally removed Patricia from power. "The current system relies too heavily on the good faith of board members," I said in my testimony. "When someone like Patricia Morrison gets into power, residents have very limited recourse. The bylaws gave her broad authority with little oversight. We were fortunate that our board had enough reasonable members to eventually vote her out, but that's not always the case." The legislation I supported would require HOAs to provide a formal appeals process for citations, limit the amount of fines that could be assessed before a hearing, and create a state ombudsman office to investigate complaints about HOA abuse. It passed the committee and was scheduled for a full vote in the next legislative session. Meanwhile, life in Saguaro Heights had settled into something approaching normal. The front yard gardens were flourishing, producing tomatoes and peppers and herbs. The community pool was operating smoothly with its properly maintained filter system. The roads were freshly paved, the playground equipment had been updated, and the community center had a new roof. George was running for re-election as president, unopposed again. Marcus, Sandra, Robert, and I were all staying on the board. We were working well together as a team, focused on practical community improvements rather than petty enforcement. On a Friday evening in October, exactly 2 years after the ceiling fan incident that started everything, I hosted a dinner party at my house. Marcus and his wife Laura, George and his husband Richard, Sandra and her girlfriend Michelle, and a few other neighbors. We ate on my back patio under the covered area, the ceiling fan rotating clockwise as the evening air grew chilly. Inside the house, the other fans were also set to clockwise, exactly as they should be for fall weather. Over dinner, the conversation turned inevitably to the Patricia situation. "Do you think she ever understood what she did wrong?" Laura asked. "I doubt it," George said. "People like that rarely do. In her mind, she was the defender of community standards, and we were all just troublemakers who didn't appreciate her dedication." "I heard she's working at a real estate office in Albuquerque," Richard added. "Apparently, she's doing fine, just living a normal life." "Good for her, I guess," I said. "As long as she's not running another HOA. "I think she's permanently banned in Arizona," Marcus said. "I don't know if that extends to other states." "Let's hope she learned something," Sandra said, though her tone suggested she doubted it. The conversation shifted to other topics. Upcoming community events, someone's new grandchild, plans for the holidays, a movie everyone wanted to see. As the party wound down and people started heading home, George pulled me aside. "You know, none of this would have happened if you just let her inspect your fans that day. I know. You could have avoided all of it. The harassment, the vandalism, the trial, all of it. Maybe. But then she'd still be president, still abusing her authority, still making everyone miserable. Sometimes you have to stand up even when it would be easier not to." "That's true. And I'm glad you did. We all are." After everyone left, I sat alone on my patio, listening to the quiet sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. Somewhere a dog barked. A car drove by slowly. In the distance, I could hear the faint sound of music from someone's outdoor speakers. My ceiling fan rotated steadily above me, pushing warm air down in gentle circulation, doing exactly what it was designed to do according to the laws of physics and thermodynamics. I thought about how something so small, so trivial, had become the catalyst for major change. A ceiling fan. The direction it spun. Such a ridiculous thing to fight over, and yet it had mattered because it represented something larger. The question of how much authority others should have over our private lives, and how we respond when that authority is abused. I'd responded by standing my ground, by insisting on facts and logic and reasonableness. And it had worked, though not without cost and conflict and stress. But sitting there on my patio 2 years later, looking out at my peaceful neighborhood, I knew I'd made the right choice. Sometimes you have to fight the small battles because they're actually big battles in disguise. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Hey, confirmed for Thanksgiving. Also bringing my new boyfriend. Hope that's okay." I texted back. "Of course. Looking forward to it." Another text came through, this one from Jennifer at the HOA Reform Coalition. "Bill passed committee. Moving to full vote in January. Thanks again for your testimony." I smiled and texted back my congratulations. The air was getting cold now, and I stood to go inside. Tomorrow was Saturday, which meant sleeping in, then maybe working on the deck repairs I'd been putting off, then probably stopping by Marcus's house for the football game he was hosting. Normal life. Peaceful life. The way it should be. I walked through my house, checking that everything was locked up for the night. In each room, the ceiling fan rotated clockwise, gentle and steady. In the summer, I'd flip the switches and they'd rotate counterclockwise, creating that cooling downdraft. Physics supports my method. And no one would ever fine me for it again.